I found Ashford on March 14th, 1893. Federal Marshal's badge does not mean much when you're staring at 200 empty chairs and plates still steaming. The railroad company sent me because their surveying crew refused to go back, said the town felt wrong. Railroad men are not superstitious. They have seen strikes, claim jumpers, cholera camps. But 3 of them quit rather than return to Ashford. I should have listened. The town sat in a valley, 20 miles from the nearest settlement, spring survey route. The railroad wanted the land. Ashford was in the way. Standard negotiation until if everyone vanished. I rode in at dawn. The first thing I noticed was the smoke. Chimneys were still going, breakfast fires, forge fires, the bakery oven, all burning. All tended recently enough that coals glowed red, but no one was there. Main Street looked like someone had rung a dinner bell and the entire population just stood up. Left, mid-task. The blacksmith hammer lay on the anvil, still warm. A horseshoe glowed orange in the coals. He would be mid-strike when something interrupted him. The general store's door hung open. Coins scattered on the counter. A woman's shopping list pinned under a jar of preserves. Flour, sugar, thread, lamp oil. Handwriting was neat, unhurried. She would be planning next week's meals. I checked the saloon first. Always check a saloon. 6 glasses of whiskey sat on the bar, still full. A card game abandoned mid-hand. Aces and 8s spread across the table. Dead man's hand. The coincidence made my skin crawl. 1 glass had lipstick on the rim. The saloon girl, I knew her type. Tough, pragmatic, survivors. She would not leave a full glass behind. Not unless something made her. That is when I noticed the chairs. Every single chair in the saloon was facing the window, not scattered, not random, deliberately turned. Like everyone had stood up at the same moment and turned to look at something outside. I went to the window, looked out at Main Street. Nothing, just empty road, and those chimneys still smoking. Before the church, I checked the residential homes. Needed to be thorough. That is what marshals do. The mayor's house was first. Front door unlocked. Kitchen table set for breakfast. 4 plates. Eggs congealing on porcelain. Coffee in cups. Still lukewarm when I touched the ceramic. A child's primer lay open on the table. A is for apple. B is for ball. Someone had been teaching reading during breakfast. The child's chair was pulled back, like they would stood up mid-lesson. I went upstairs. The beds were made, clothes laid out for the day. A woman's dress on the bed. Pearl buttons already fastened, like she would been planning to put it on. But in the mirror, I saw movement, just for a second, a flicker. I checked 6 more houses, all the same. Food prepared, lives interrupted, tasks abandoned mid-motion. In the doctor's office, I found his examination notes. The last entry was dated that morning. Patient presents with unusual complaint. Says she sees her deceased sister standing in her bedroom. Sister has been dead 3 years. Recommend rest and laudanum. The entry ended mid-sentence. The pen had scratched a line across the page, like his hand had been pulled away while writing. The schoolhouse made my stomach turn. 20 desks, 20 children, all of them writing the same sentence over and over. It is watching us from the hills. Every single child, same sentence, different handwriting. The teacher's desk had a note pinned to it. If you are reading this, do not look at the hills after dark. It wants you to look. Do not give it what it wants. The note was unsigned. I looked at the hills. Even in daylight they felt wrong, too symmetrical, like something had arranged them deliberately. And in the tree line I could see gaps, dark spaces between the pines. The gaps looked like they were breathing. I left the schoolhouse. The church was worse. Sunday service had been interrupted. Hymnals open to page 43. Abide with me. The organ's keys were still depressed. Someone's fingers had been on them when they vanished. The sound had faded hours ago, but I could still see the indentation in the felt. 200 people. The entire congregation gone, but their belongings remained. Hats on pegs, coats folded on pews, a baby's rattle on the floor near the front row. The rattle was still rocking, slightly, like someone had just set it down. I picked it up. The wood was warm and carved into the bottom in fresh knife marks. Helpless. That is when I heard it, a sound from outside, faint, rhythmic. Footsteps. I went to the church door, listened. The footsteps were coming from multiple directions, slow, measured, all perfectly synchronized, like a military march, but wrong. The rhythm was off by fractions of a second. Human footsteps do not sync at precisely. I drew my revolver and opened the door. Main Street was empty, but the footsteps continued, closer now. I could hear boot heels on wooden planks, the creak of boardwalk, but there was no one there. I backed into the church, locked the door. The footsteps stopped. Silence, complete, total. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. No birds, no wind, no distant animal calls. The world had been muted. Then I heard a voice, Marshal Dalkin, my name, clear as day. Maya from the street outside. It was my wife's voice. My wife died in childbirth 4 years ago. I buried her in Springfield, 600 miles from this valley. Thomas. Her voice again, soft, loving. Come outside, Thomas. I did not move. Thomas, I have been waiting. Come see me. The door handle turned, slowly, testing. I would locked it. I knew I would locked it. The handle turned again, back and forth, like someone was confused by the concept of a lock, learning how it worked. Then it stopped. Silence again. I waited 5 minutes, 10. My revolver trained on the door. Nothing happened. I moved to the window, looked out at the street. She was standing there. My wife, Rebecca, wearing the blue dress I buried her in, hair done the way she liked. She was smiling, but she was too tall. Not by much, just wrong. like someone had stretched her proportions by 10%. Her arms hung slightly too long. Her neck was just a fraction too thin, and she was not breathing. I watched for a full minute. Her chest never moved. No rise and fall. No breath missed in the cold March air. She tilted her head, still smiling. "Come outside, Thomas." Her lips did not move when she spoke. I backed away from the window. The church had another door, rear exit to the cemetery. I went there, quietly, testing the handle, locked from the outside. I had not locked it. I was trapped. That is when I noticed the altar. The Bible was open. I had not looked closely before. Now I did. The page was Revelations, chapter 6. The passage about the pale horse and the rider named Death. Someone had underlined a single verse in fresh ink, and I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. The ink was still wet. I touched it. My finger came away red, not ink, blood. The church doors rattled, front and back simultaneously. Something was testing them, shaking them. The wood groaned, but held. Then the windows shattered. Not broken, shattered, all at once. Every window in the church exploded inward in a shower of colored glass. But there was no sound, no crash. Just the visual of glass fragmenting, falling in complete silence. And through every window frame, I saw faces, the townspeople, all 200 of them, standing in a perfect circle around the church, staring in, but they were wrong. Their eyes did not blink. Their mouths hung open at identical angles. They swayed slightly, like wheat in wind, but there was no wind, and they were all too tall. Same wrongness as Rebecca, stretched, proportions off. Like something had tried to recreate humans from memory and gotten the measurements slightly wrong. One of them stepped through the window frame, climbed inside. It was the blacksmith. I recognized his leather apron, his massive arms, but he moved wrong. His joints entered angles that should not exist. His leg folded backwards at the knee, then forwards again, like he was learning how to walk, remembering the mechanics. He smiled at me. His teeth were perfect, too white, too many of them. I fired. The bullet went through his chest, clean through. I saw the exit wound, saw the hole, but nothing came out. No blood, no tissue, just empty, like shooting through fog. He kept walking toward me. I fired again, headshot. His skull snapped back. He straightened, still smiling. "Thomas," Rebecca's voice came from his mouth. "Why are you afraid?" More of them climbed through the windows. The saloon girl, the shopkeeper, a child who could not have been more than 7, all moving wrong, all too tall, all smiling with too many teeth. I ran for the organ loft, climbed the ladder, slammed the trap door. They did not follow. They just stood at the base of the ladder, looking up, swaying, waiting. That is when I noticed the sounds, not from them, from outside. The entire town was moving. I could hear footsteps on every street, doors opening and closing, the blacksmith's hammer striking the anvil, the saloon piano playing, children's laughter from the schoolhouse. The town was performing normalcy, but it was all wrong. The hammer strikes were too rhythmic, mathematical. The piano played the same 8 notes in an endless loop. The children's laughter never changed pitch or tempo. It was a recording, a memory of life, something trying to recreate human activity without understanding it. I looked down at the figures below me. They were changing faster now. The blacksmith's body was elongating, his torso stretching like taffy, his arms growing longer, thinner, the joints multiplying. I counted 7 elbows on his right arm. The child was worst. She was growing, aging. I watched her face cycle through decades in seconds. Infant, toddler, teenager, adult, elderly, then back to child again. Her skin flickering between states, her eyes changing color with each cycle, and they were all looking up at me with perfect attention. No blinking, no movement, except that slow sway. Like predators watching prey tire itself out, I stayed in that loft for 6 hours, maybe more. Time felt broken. My pocket watch had stopped at 10:47 a.m., the exact time the surveying crew said they would arrive, and found the town empty. Every time I looked down, they were still there, staring up, patient, but their faces were changing, slowly, imperceptibly at first, but I noticed. The blacksmith's face was becoming my face, his features shifting, morphing, like clay being sculpted. The child's face was becoming my mother's face. They were trying to become people I knew, people I would lost. My father, my brother, Rebecca again, all of them, standing below me, wearing faces from my memories. But they could not get the details right. My father's scar was on the wrong cheek. My brother's eyes were the wrong shade of blue. Rebecca's beauty mark had migrated from her left temple to her right. They were working from fragments, incomplete data. Come down, Thomas. They spoke in unison, perfect harmony. Stay with us. We are all here. Everyone you have lost, we are all here now. One of them, wearing my stillborn son's face, a child I would never seen alive, reached up towards the ladder, his arm extended and extended and extended. The limb grew like a vine, bones popping and reforming, skin stretching. The hand at the end getting closer, closer. I pressed myself against the far wall. The hand stopped inches from my boot. It hung there, fingers twitching, like it was testing the limits of how far it could reach. Then it retracted, slowly, folding back down into a normal arm length. They were learning my boundaries, testing what they could do, what I would tolerate. I realized I was sobbing, had been for some time. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, it was dark, but something was different. The church was empty. I climbed down, every muscle screaming. I would been crouched in that loft for hours. The main doors were open. Outside, the town looked normal, but it was the wrong kind of normal. Everything was exactly where it had been. The same plates on tables, the same positions, but it felt like a stage set. Like something had carefully arranged everything back to match my memory of arrival. The street was too clean. No wind-blown dust. No animal tracks. No disturbance at all. I walked to my horse. He was dead, standing upright, eyes open. Dead. I touched his neck, cold, stiff. He'd been dead for hours, but he was standing perfectly still, frozen mid-breath. I backed away. That is when I noticed the people in the windows, every window in every building, a face watching me, the same faces from the church, still wrong, still too tall, but now they were everywhere. And they were smiling. I ran for the edge of town. The road stretched ahead of me, clear, empty. I ran for 10 minutes, 15, and came back to the church, from the same direction. I would run in a straight line, but somehow I would ended up back where I started. I tried again, different direction, same result. The town was a loop, a closed circle, geography that folded in itself. I tried 5 more times. Each time, I ended up back at the church. My legs gave out. I collapsed in the middle of Main Street. That is when the doors started opening. Every building, simultaneously. The same creak of hinges, the same timing, and they walked out, all 200 of them, moving in perfect synchronization. Left foot, right foot, mechanical precision. They formed a circle around me. I could not run, could not fight. I just sat there in the dirt and waited. They stood at the circle's edge, 10 feet away, not approaching, just waiting. One of them, Rebecca's shape, tilted her head. "You cannot leave, Thomas. The town needs people. It has been empty too long." They spoke in sequence, each one saying a single sentence, creating a conversation through dozens of mouths. "You are going to stay. You are going to be the first. Then others will come. The train will bring them, and the town will be full again. Will not that be nice?" I found my voice. "What are you?" They all tilted their heads in unison, like birds, curious. "We are Ashford," they said together. "We are home. We are forever." Then they started walking toward me. I do not know what I did next. The memory is fragmented, pieces missing. I remember screaming. I remember running. I remember my hands bleeding from climbing over something sharp. I remember darkness, and then I remember dawn. I was 5 miles outside town, on the main road. My horse, alive, confused, frightened, was tied to a tree nearby. My clothes were shredded, my hands cut to ribbons, my throat raw from screaming. But I was out. I rode for 2 days straight. Did not stop except to water the horse. When I reached the railroad office, I filed my report, told them everything. The company manager listened without expression. Then he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside were 17 other reports, all describing the same thing. All from different towns along the planned railroad route. "You are the first one who made it out," he said. He burned my report along with the others. Ashford was demolished 3 weeks later. Railroad crew worked in shifts. No one stayed overnight. They tore down every building, salted the earth, built the tracks right through where the church had stood. But the crew reported problems. Tools going missing, finding them later in impossible places. Hammers on church steeples that no longer existed. Saws stuck in trees that had been cut down. 3 workers quit. Said they saw someone watching from the hills. Someone too tall. The railroad still runs through that valley, but engineers report anomalies. Compasses spinning, clocks stopping at 10:47 a.m. Passengers seeing faces in the window reflections, faces that are not their own. And sometimes late at night, the train slows down, not mechanically. The engine's fine. The brakes are not engaged. It just slows, like something's holding it back. The engineers say if you look out the window during those slowdowns, you can see them standing in the darkness beside the tracks. 200 figures, too tall, swaying slightly, all of them smiling, all of them waiting for the train to stop. It never does, but one day it will. And when it does, the passengers will step off onto a platform that should not exist. They will walk into a town with fires still burning and dinner still warm, and they will sit down at those tables, and they will never leave. I resigned my marshal position in 1894, moved east, changed my name, but last week I got a letter, no return, address, postmarked from Ashford, Montana, the town that does not exist anymore. Inside was a single photograph, me standing in front of the Ashford church, but I am too tall in the photograph, and I am smiling with too many teeth. I do not remember the photograph being taken. I burned it, but this morning I found it again on my breakfast table, unburned, pristine, and on the back, written in my own handwriting, "Come home, Thomas. Dinner's getting cold." I am writing this down because I need someone to know what happened. The town is not abandoned. It is waiting, and it is very, very patient. If you ever see a town that looks too perfect, too preserved, fires still burning, and food still warm, do not go inside. Do not investigate. Just keep moving. Because once you see it, it sees you, and it never forgets a face, even if that face becomes something else.